Senator Kennedy, your folksy act doesn't hide that you're just an ignorant Southern Trump puppet pretending to understand law. You're an embarrassment to the Senate. Adam Schiff's words hung in the air of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room like poison gas, thick with California arrogance and East Coast contempt. The congressman from Burbank sat surrounded by his entourage of 5 lawyers, 8 staffers, and enough briefing materials to fill a small library. His Armani suit probably cost more than most Americans made in a month. His tan was perfect, his hair styled with the precision of a man who spent more time in makeup chairs than committee rooms. Everything about Adam Schiff screamed power, confidence, and the absolute certainty that he was about to humiliate a backwards Republican senator from the swamps of Louisiana. Senator John Kennedy sat alone at the witness table. No entourage, no team of lawyers, just one battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived multiple hurricanes and possibly a few alligator attacks. His suit was decent but rumpled, the kind you'd see on a small-town lawyer heading to traffic court, not a Senate hearing broadcast to millions. His white hair was slightly disheveled, his reading glasses the cheap kind you buy at drugstores. To anyone watching, especially the liberal media packed into the press gallery like sardines, this looked like a mismatch of historic proportions. The sophisticated California prosecutor versus the country bumpkin from the bayou. CNN already had their chyron prepared. Schiff School's Southern senator on intelligence matters. MSNBC was ready with their panel of experts to dissect Kennedy's inevitable humiliation. The only question seemed to be how badly Schiff would destroy him, and whether Kennedy would survive the encounter with any dignity intact. The hearing was supposed to be routine oversight of intelligence community reforms, a joint session where both chambers could address concerns about surveillance, leaks, and the politicization of America's spy agencies. But everyone in Washington knew the real purpose. Adam Schiff, fresh off his role as chief prosecutor in President Trump's impeachment, was going to make an example of John Kennedy, one of Trump's most vocal defenders. This was political theater, and Schiff had written himself as the hero. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the country lawyer from Louisiana had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. While Schiff leaked to friendly media and gave sanctimonious speeches about defending democracy, Kennedy had been quietly building a case. Folder by folder, document by document, witness by witness. The briefcase sitting innocently on the table contained enough evidence to end multiple careers. And Kennedy had been patiently waiting for exactly this moment, when Schiff's arrogance would make him vulnerable. "Well, Congressman Schiff," Kennedy began, his Louisiana drawl so thick you could pour it over pancakes, "my mama taught me that when someone calls you ignorant, you should educate them. Today's lesson is about your career. Class is in session and tuition is free." The room stirred. That wasn't the response anyone expected. Defeated men don't speak with confidence. Humiliated senators don't smile like Kennedy was smiling, a small, knowing expression that suggested he was in on a joke no one else had heard yet. Schiff leaned forward, sensing he needed to press his advantage before Kennedy found his footing. "Maybe we should start with your voting record, Senator. You've opposed every intelligence reform measure. You've called dedicated public servants deep state operatives. You've defended a president who attacked our institutions daily. Frankly, your backwards Southern politics belong in the 19th century, not the 21st. Several Democrats on the committee chuckled. The media typed furiously, already crafting their headlines about the Southern senator getting destroyed by the brilliant California congressman. Kennedy listened quietly, occasionally cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief that had definitely seen better days. His expression was mild, almost amused, like he was watching an interesting but not particularly bright child try to solve a puzzle. "And that accent," Schiff added, unable to resist one more jab, "perhaps you could speak a bit faster. Some of us have actual work to do today, and translating your country drawl takes time we don't have." The room laughed. Even some Republicans looked uncomfortable, wondering if Kennedy was out of his depth. This was shaping up to be a massacre, and massacres were never fun to watch, even when they happened to your own side. Kennedy finally looked up, directly at Schiff, his eyes meeting the congressman's with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "Well now, Congressman, I appreciate your concern about my speaking pace and my education. Let me address both real quick so we can move on to more important matters, like your crimes." The laughter stopped abruptly. Crimes. Schiff's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "You see," Kennedy continued, his drawl somehow getting even thicker. "Where I come from in Louisiana, we have a saying, 'Don't start none, won't be none.' But since you brought up my education and my intelligence, I suppose I should mention a few things. I did manage to muddle through Vanderbilt University, somehow got into the University of Virginia Law School where I barely scraped by, and then there was that other school, what was it called?" He paused, pretending to think. "Oh yes, Oxford University, in England, Rhodes Scholar Program, you might have heard of it." The room went absolutely silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Kennedy reached into his briefcase with the unhurried patience of a man who had all day and pulled out a bound document. "And while we're discussing education, I've been doing some reading myself. This here is your Harvard Law School thesis, Congressman, Prosecutorial Ethics in the Modern Justice System. Fascinating stuff, really. Page 47 is particularly interesting." He adjusted his cheap reading glasses and began reading in his slow, musical drawl. "A prosecutor who manipulates evidence or misleads the court betrays not just his office but the very foundation of justice itself." Those are your words, Congressman Schiff, written when you were young and presumably still had principles. Shall we discuss how well you've lived up to them? The color drained from Schiff's face so quickly it was like watching a time lapse of snow melting. His lawyers began whispering urgently among themselves, frantically flipping through their own briefing materials, trying to figure out where this was going and how to stop it. "Now, you mentioned I don't understand complex legal matters," Kennedy continued, his voice still conversational, still friendly, still carrying that drawl that Schiff had mocked moments earlier. "So let me see if I can struggle through this with my limited intellectual capacity. You also challenged my knowledge of California law, which is interesting because I've memorized the evidence codes of all 50 states. Just for fun, you understand. The way some people do crossword puzzles." He rattled off a specific statute from memory. California Evidence Code Section 1040 subsection B states that public entities have a privilege to refuse disclosure of official information if disclosure is against the public interest. You personally violated that section exactly 17 times during your tenure as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Would you like me to list the dates and specific violations, or shall we just stipulate that you don't actually care about California law? Schiff opened his mouth, then closed it. His team of lawyers was in full panic mode now, passing notes, whispering urgently, looking like passengers who just realized the captain had no idea how to fly the plane. "But I'm just a simple country lawyer," Kennedy added with theatrical modesty. "What would I know about the intricacies of evidence law and prosecutorial misconduct?" The press section had gone completely quiet. This wasn't the narrative they'd prepared for. This wasn't the story they'd come to write. The backward Southern senator was supposed to be humiliated, not delivering what sounded increasingly like an indictment. "Speaking of prosecutorial misconduct," Kennedy said, reaching back into his briefcase, "I brought some homework today. 23 folders to be exact, each one documenting what my grandpappy would have called high crimes and misdemeanors from your career." He began pulling folders out one by one, arranging them on the desk with the careful precision of a card dealer laying out a winning hand. Each folder had a label, clearly visible to the cameras and the press gallery. Russia hoax, whistleblower coordination, illegal leaks, Chinese connections, Eid Buck cover-up, FISA abuse, witness tampering, media manipulation, campaign finance fraud. The stack grew higher with each folder. Schiff's face had gone from pale to gray, his confident smirk completely vanished, replaced by something that looked like the beginning of genuine fear. "Now, Congressman Schiff," Kennedy said, his voice taking on a harder edge despite the maintained drawl, "you called me ignorant, backwards, and an embarrassment. My mama taught me that when someone insults you like that, they're usually describing themselves. So let's test that theory, shall we? Let's see who the real embarrassment is." Schiff turned toward the committee chairman, a Democrat from California who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. "Mr. Chairman, I object to this line of questioning. This hearing was supposed to be about intelligence reform, not personal attacks. Personal attacks. Kennedy's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. Sir, you just spent 10 minutes attacking my intelligence, my education, my accent, and my state. I'm simply responding with facts. But if you'd prefer, we can absolutely focus on intelligence reform, starting with reforming the intelligence of certain committee chairmen who wouldn't recognize the truth if it walked up and introduced itself in perfect English. Even some Democrats couldn't suppress their smiles at that one. The country lawyer was landing punches, and they were starting to hurt. Schiff's chief lawyer stood up, trying to regain control. Senator Kennedy, we came here prepared to discuss substantive policy matters, not engage in political theater. Sit down, counselor, Kennedy said mildly. Your client opened this particular can of worms when he called me an ignorant Southern puppet. Now he's going to eat every single worm in that can, and you're going to sit there quietly and watch him do it. The authority in Kennedy's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the fumbling country lawyer anymore. This was a Rhodes Scholar, a former judge, a legal mind that had been hiding behind folksy expressions and deliberately slow speech. The mask was coming off, and what was underneath was terrifying to anyone who'd underestimated him. Let's start with Russia, shall we? Kennedy suggested, reaching for the first folder, because that's where your problems really began. Well, actually, they probably began in law school when you apparently skipped every ethics class. But Russia is where they became public, where you lied to the American people on national television over 200 times. He opened the folder with the deliberate care of a surgeon making the first incision. This is going to be more fun than a crawfish boil in July, and twice as messy. Schiff tried one more time to regain his footing, to recapture the aggressive momentum he'd had just minutes earlier. Senator, you're deflecting from your own record of supporting a compromised president who compromised. Kennedy interrupted softly, dangerously. Sir, you spent 3 years claiming you had evidence of Russian collusion. More than circumstantial evidence, you said. Direct evidence you told every cable news show that would have you. So let's see that evidence. Right here, right now. Show us what you had. Schiff blinked rapidly, sweat beginning to form on his perfectly tanned forehead. The evidence was presented to the special counsel and to the intelligence community in classified settings. I can't discuss. Oh, but you did discuss it, Kennedy said, pulling out a small digital recorder. Extensively. To CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Politico, and approximately 47 other media outlets. You discussed it in general terms, you said, always protecting sources and methods. Except here's the funny thing. He pressed play on the recorder. Schiff's voice filled the committee room, crystal clear, from a closed-door classified session in March 2019. We don't have direct evidence yet, but I'm confident we'll find it if we keep looking long enough and investigating deep enough. Now, Kennedy continued, stopping the recording that was from a classified session where you were under oath and presumably telling the truth to your colleagues. But that very same evening, you went on CNN and told Anderson Cooper, and I quote, "We have smoking gun evidence of collusion that will shock the American people." The contrast was devastating. In private, under oath, admitting no evidence existed. In public, on television, claiming evidence was overwhelming. That's not a difference of interpretation, Congressman. That's called lying. And you did it 237 times. I know because I counted each one personally, then had my staff verify it 3 times because I'm thorough like that. Schiff tried to speak, but Kennedy rolled right over him. But wait, it gets better. Let me ask you something personal, Congressman. Did you know a man named Dmitry Volkov? Schiff's eyes went wide, genuine panic flashing across his face. I don't recall anyone by that name. Let me refresh your memory, Kennedy offered, pulling out a photograph. Harvard Law School, class of 1985. Your roommate for 2 years, son of a prominent Russian diplomat. Currently works for Gazprom, a Russian state-owned energy company. You lived with him, studied with him, partied with him. But you don't recall him. The photograph appeared on the screen behind Kennedy, showing a young Adam Schiff with his arm around an equally young Russian man, both smiling at the camera, clearly close friends. You spent 3 years accusing President Trump of having Russian connections, while you literally roomed with the son of a Russian diplomat. You projected your own compromised relationships onto others like an IMAX theater projecting a movie. In Louisiana, we call that psychological projection, but I suppose in California you call it Tuesday. Schiff was gripping the edge of the table now, his knuckles white. His entourage of lawyers looked like they were having a collective heart attack. This wasn't supposed to happen. The country bumpkin wasn't supposed to have evidence. He wasn't supposed to fight back. He was supposed to be destroyed, not doing the destroying. Kennedy pulled out another document, this one stamped with official seals. And speaking of classified information, didn't you discuss that supposedly classified committee meeting on national television the same night it occurred? Let me show you. He played a split-screen video. On one side, the timestamp from the classified session. On the other, Schiff on CNN just hours later, discussing specific details from that meeting, details that were clearly classified. Your memory seems to be very selective, Congressman. You can't remember your college roommate who happened to be Russian, but you can remember classified details well enough to leak them to CNN within hours. That's convenient amnesia combined with deliberate disclosure of classified information. In legal terms, we call that a felony. He closed the Russia folder with a decisive snap. But you didn't just lie about Russia. You orchestrated an entire disinformation campaign, used your position as chairman to weaponize classified information, and you did it all while lecturing the rest of us about defending democracy. Sir, you are what we in the legal profession call a hypocrite of the highest order, and what we in Louisiana call lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. The room was absolutely silent except for the mechanical whir of cameras. Schiff looked like he wanted to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Every exit was blocked by press, by spectators, by the reality that he'd walked into a trap of his own making. Kennedy reached for the second folder, this one labeled Whistleblower Coordination, and smiled that small, knowing smile again. Now, shall we discuss your little coaching session with the so-called whistleblower? Because that's where things get really interesting, and by interesting, I mean criminal. Now this folder here, Kennedy began, tapping the whistleblower coordination file with one finger. This one tells a story that's more twisted than a Louisiana back road. You remember the whistleblower, don't you, Congressman? The one whose identity we're all supposed to protect, even though everyone in Washington knows exactly who he is. The one you definitely never met, never coordinated with, and certainly never coached on what to say. Schiff straightened in his chair, trying to summon some of his earlier confidence. Senator, I followed all proper procedures regarding the whistleblower complaint. I did everything by the book. Which book would that be? Kennedy asked innocently. Because it sure wasn't the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. He pulled out a detailed timeline that looked like something from a murder investigation board. August 12, 2019, 2:47 p.m. Your staff meets with the whistleblower at a coffee shop in Arlington, Virginia. I know the exact time because one of your staffers paid with a credit card and we have the receipt. August 12, 2019, 6:23 p.m. same day, the whistleblower files his complaint. Now I'm not a mathematician, but those odds of coincidence are longer than the line at a Louisiana crawfish boil. There was no coordination, Schiff protested weakly. We simply provided guidance on proper procedures for filing a complaint. Hold on now, Kennedy interrupted, pulling out his phone with a theatrical flourish. I'm going to do something a little unconventional here. I'm going to text someone right now in real time while we're all watching. He held up his phone so the cameras could see him typing. Hey, remember those meetings with Schiff's staff before you filed your complaint? How many times did you meet? Room was dead silent. Everyone watching, waiting. Kennedy's phone buzzed almost immediately. He looked at the screen, his eyebrows rising in exaggerated surprise. Well, would you look at that? The response says, and I quote, 7 times. They told me exactly what to write and how to write it. Said if I didn't follow their script, the complaint wouldn't be taken seriously. Kennedy showed the phone screen to the cameras, the message clearly visible. 7 times, Congressman. Your staff met with him 7 times. That's not providing procedural guidance. That's ghostwriting. That's witness coaching. That's conspiracy. Schiff's face had gone from gray to a sickly green color. His lawyers were frantically whispering, but they looked as panicked as he did. But it gets even better, Kennedy announced, clearly enjoying himself now. He produced a photograph that made several people in the gallery gasp. This here is from Citron in Georgetown. Fancy French place. Very expensive. Very private. Very good for having conversations you don't want overheard. And look who's having dinner together on August 5th, one whole week before the complaint was filed. The photo was crystal clear. Adam Schiff sitting across a small table from a younger man, both leaning in close, both looking around nervously like people who knew they shouldn't be seen together. The date stamp on the photo was undeniable. "You coached the witness," Kennedy said flatly, all the drawl suddenly gone from his voice. "You told him what to allege. You helped him craft his complaint. Then you acted surprised when it landed on your desk, shocked as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. That's not whistleblower protection, Congressman. That's conspiracy to fabricate evidence." "But the real masterpiece," Kennedy continued, pulling out a transcript, "was your performance when you read the president's phone call to the committee. Remember that? Your dramatic reading where you made up dialogue, invented conversations, created quotes that never existed." He played a video clip of Schiff's infamous parody, the one where he'd completely fabricated what Trump said in his call with the Ukrainian president, making it sound like a mob shakedown. "Now let's compare that to the actual transcript," Kennedy suggested, pulling out the official document. He read sections side by side, and the contrast was absolutely devastating. Schiff had invented almost everything, turned a routine diplomatic call into something sinister through pure fabrication. "You lied," Kennedy said simply, "on national television, under oath, to Congress, to the American people. You made up quotes. You invented dialogue. You created a completely false narrative and presented it as fact. In Louisiana, we call that fraud. In most states, we call it perjury. In California, apparently, you call it effective communication." The press section was in absolute chaos now, reporters frantically filing updates, the narrative they'd prepared completely shattered. This wasn't Schiff destroying Kennedy. This was Kennedy systematically demolishing Schiff with evidence the congressman clearly hadn't known existed. "But here's my favorite part," Kennedy said, reaching deeper into the folder. "You didn't just coach the whistleblower. You hid exculpatory evidence. 17 witness testimonies that contradicted your impeachment narrative. 17 testimonies that you buried in your basement like mob informants in a shallow grave." He began pulling out transcripts, reading excerpts that destroyed Schiff's carefully constructed story. "Ambassador Volker, I saw no evidence of any quid pro quo. Timothy Morrison, I saw nothing illegal or improper in the president's call." Kurt Volker again. "There was absolutely no linkage between security assistance and investigations. Every single witness contradicted what you were telling the media, so you hid their testimony. You buried the truth because the truth didn't serve your narrative." Kennedy's voice was rising now, genuine anger breaking through the folksy exterior. "You had 17 witnesses tell you under oath that there was no crime, and you hid that evidence from Congress, from the media, from the American people. You're a former prosecutor, Congressman. You know that's called obstruction of justice. You know that's called suborning perjury. You know that's a felony." He pulled out a model of the Capitol building, an actual three-dimensional model, and placed it on the desk. "Speaking of hiding things, let's talk about your basement bunker. The Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, the SCIF, where you held your secret impeachment hearings like some kind of political Batman villain, except Batman fights for justice, and you were fighting against it." Kennedy pointed to the basement level with a laser pointer he'd produced from somewhere. "Down here in these rooms, you held secret hearings. Republicans were locked out, literally locked out of hearings they had every right to attend. Witnesses were coached in private. Testimony was selectively leaked to friendly media. You turned the United States Capitol into your personal star chamber, and you did it while lecturing everyone else about defending democracy." A Republican congressman from Texas stood up, unable to contain himself any longer. "That's exactly what happened. They wouldn't let us in. We're representatives of the American people, and they barred us from hearings about impeaching the president." "Order," the committee chairman said weakly, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. The narrative was collapsing in real time. Kennedy pulled out one more document, this one marked with official FBI letterhead. "Here's my absolute favorite piece of evidence from this folder. This is an email from your staff director to the whistleblower. Subject line: suggested revisions to your complaint. Congressman, you edited his homework like a teacher with a red pen. You revised his complaint, strengthened his language, added allegations he hadn't made. Then you had the brass balls to act shocked. Shocked, I tell you, when the complaint you helped write showed up on your desk. Kennedy shook his head in mock amazement. That's like being surprised to find gambling in a casino. That's like acting amazed that the sun came up this morning. It's not just dishonest. It's insulting to everyone's intelligence. And Lord knows you've already insulted my intelligence enough for one day. He closed the whistleblower folder with a decisive thump. You weaponized the Intelligence Committee, turned oversight into overthrow, and made a mockery of due process. You coordinated with the witness, coached his testimony, hid exculpatory evidence, conducted secret hearings, and then leaked selectively to create a false narrative. In legal terms, that's called racketeering. In Louisiana terms, that's called being crooked as a dog's hind leg. Schiff was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his hands were shaking. He looked like a man watching his entire career circle the drain in real time. His lawyers had given up whispering advice. They just sat there looking shell-shocked. Kennedy reached for the third folder, this one labeled Ed Buck and Other Scandals, and his expression changed from prosecutorial to disgusted. Now, Congressman, this next folder requires a strong stomach, because we're going to talk about your donors, specifically the ones who have a habit of killing people. Fair warning to folks watching at home, this gets dark. This folder here, Kennedy said quietly, handling it like it contained something toxic, which in a moral sense it did, tells a story about what you're willing to tolerate when the money's good. Ed Buck was a major donor to your campaigns, gave you over $500,000 over the years. He also had a very disturbing hobby. Young men kept dying in his apartment. 2 dead bodies, both young black men, both dying of drug overdoses in his home, and you kept taking his money. The photographs Kennedy pulled out made several people in the gallery look away. Gemma Moore, 26 years old, Timothy Dean, 55 years old, both found dead in Ed Buck's West Hollywood apartment, both victims of forced drug overdoses. And the entire Democratic establishment in California knew. Everyone knew Ed Buck was dangerous. Everyone knew young men were dying, but the money kept flowing and the protection kept coming. Kennedy's voice had lost all traces of humor now. This wasn't political theater anymore. This was about real victims, real families, real lives destroyed while politicians looked the other way. Did those young men's lives matter less than Ed Buck's campaign contributions? Kennedy asked, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. Because that's what your actions suggest, Congressman. That black lives only matter when they're politically useful, but when protecting them might cost you money, suddenly, they don't matter so much. He clicked a remote, and a video began playing on the screens throughout the room. A middle-aged black woman appeared, tears streaming down her face, her voice shaking with grief and rage. "My name is Letitia Nixon," the woman said. "My son Jemal was murdered by Ed Buck, and Adam Schiff knew. Everyone in California Democratic politics knew Ed Buck was dangerous. They knew he was targeting young black men, but they kept taking his money. They kept protecting him. My son died because politicians like Adam Schiff cared more about campaign donations than about black lives." The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of several people crying. Even hardened political operatives couldn't watch that mother's testimony without being moved. "You claimed you returned those donations," Kennedy said, his voice hard as iron. "But according to Federal Election Commission records, you never returned a single penny. Not after the first death, not after the second death, not even after Ed Buck was finally arrested when it was politically safe to distance yourself. The money stayed in your campaign accounts. You kept it. Blood money from a serial killer, and you spent it on campaign ads and consultants and all the trappings of political power." Schiff tried to speak, but Kennedy cut him off with a gesture. "But Ed Buck wasn't your only questionable donor, was he? Let's talk about the Standard Hotel. Interesting things happened there. Young men dying mysteriously, investigations getting shut down, evidence disappearing. And wouldn't you know it, the hotel's political donations to you spiked after each incident. What exactly happened at that hotel, Congressman? What did you know? What did you help cover up?" The questions hung in the air like accusations at a murder trial. Kennedy produced a map of Lowe's angels covered in red dots. Each red dot on this map represents a donor of yours who's been convicted of, charged with, or credibly accused of serious crimes. Sexual assault, drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, fraud. I count 47 dots. 47 criminals or alleged criminals who gave you money. You're like a magnet for moral bankruptcy. A voice from the gallery shouted out, "What about the victims? What about justice for them?" Kennedy nodded gravely, pointing at the person who'd spoken. "That's exactly the right question. What about the victims? What about the young men who died while politicians looked the other way? What about the families destroyed while campaign coffers filled? What about justice?" He turned back to Schiff with undisguised contempt. "You represent one of the wealthiest districts in America, yet it has one of the worst homeless problems in the country. Skid Row is literally in your backyard. Crime is soaring. Quality of life is plummeting. Small businesses are closing. Families are fleeing. But you're in Washington getting rich, taking money from criminals, and lecturing the rest of us about ethics and values." Kennedy pulled out crime statistics that painted a devastating picture. Violent crime in your district up 42% since you took office. Property crime up 67%. Homeless population increased by 300%. But your personal net worth increased by 400%. Seems like you're the only thing thriving while your district burns. "You're like a captain who abandoned his ship but kept collecting captain's pay," Kennedy said. "Except the ship is on fire, taking on water, and the passengers are drowning while you're in the lifeguard giving interviews about how well you're steering." He closed the Ed Buck folder with visible disgust, handling it like something contaminated. "You know what the saddest part is? Those young men who died, they were somebody's sons, somebody's brothers, somebody's friends. They had dreams and hopes and families who loved them. But to you and Ed Buck, they were disposable. Their lives were worth less than campaign contributions. Their deaths were acceptable collateral damage in your pursuit of power." Kennedy removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, the gesture somehow making the moment more powerful. "My mama taught me not to speak ill of folks, but she also taught me to speak the truth. And the truth is, Congressman Schiff, you've got blood on your hands. Maybe not legally, though that's for prosecutors to determine, but morally, ethically, you're as guilty as sin on Sunday." He reached for the next folder. This one marked Chinese connections, and his expression shifted to something between disgust and fascination. "Speaking of selling out, let's talk about your relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. Because if you thought Ed Buck was bad, wait until everyone hears about who else has been funding your career and why Beijing considers you one of their most valuable assets in Congress." Before we dive into this particular swamp, Kennedy began, adjusting his glasses with deliberate precision. "I need to establish something important. You and Congressman Eric Swalwell, both California Democrats, both on the House Intelligence Committee, both compromised by Chinese intelligence operations. Swalwell got honeypotted by a Chinese spy named Fang Fang. And you? Well, you just got money-potted by every Chinese front organization in California." He opened the Chinese Connections folder, revealing financial charts that looked like spider webs of corruption. "Let's start with your donor list, shall we? It reads like a who's who of Beijing's influence operations in America. James Chang, $58,000 in donations. Also sits on the board of 3 companies directly owned by the Chinese government. Linda Wu, $75,000 in contributions. Her husband runs the U.S. branch of China Construction Bank. Should I continue, or are you getting the picture?" Schiff's attorneys were furiously taking notes, trying to keep up with the avalanche of evidence. But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Kennedy leaned forward and spoke in perfect Mandarin Chinese, his pronunciation flawless, his tone conversational. "Can you understand what I'm saying, Congressman Schiff? I'm asking if you've been taking orders from Beijing, or if you just vote the way they want because you're naturally inclined to sell out America." The room went absolutely silent. Every eye turned to Schiff, who had involuntarily started to respond in Mandarin before catching himself, his mouth hanging open, frozen in absolute horror at his mistake. His face went from green to white in an instant. "Interesting language skills you have there," Kennedy observed, switching back to English, his Louisiana drawl returning like a weapon being drawn. Where exactly did you learn Mandarin, Congressman? It's not on your official biography. You've never mentioned it in interviews. So where did you learn it? And more importantly, why did you understand my question about your Chinese handlers? The press section exploded into activity. Cameras clicking, keyboards clattering, reporters shouting questions. This was the moment that would lead every news broadcast, the smoking gun that proved Schiff had connections to China he'd never disclosed. But wait, it gets so much better, Kennedy announced, pulling out his phone. Let's see what Chinese state media is saying about this hearing right now. Oh, would you look at that? Article published in the People's Daily 47 minutes ago, right in the middle of this hearing. He read from his phone, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Congressman Adam Schiff courageously defends China against racist attacks from Southern Republican senator. They're watching in Beijing right now, Congressman. They're cheering you on in real time. You're their MVP, their most valuable puppet. Kennedy produced bank records that created a timeline of corruption so clear a child could follow it. Every time you voted against sanctions on China, mysterious deposit. Every time you killed anti-China legislation in committee, campaign contribution from Chinese-connected donors. Every time you publicly defended Chinese trade practices, speaking fees from organizations funded by Beijing. You're more reliable than a Swiss watch, if Swiss watches were owned by the Chinese Communist Party. The timeline appeared on screens throughout the room, each vote matched with corresponding financial transactions. March 2019, you vote against the Uyghur sanctions bill that would have punished China for genocide. March 20th, $25,000 deposited into your wife's consulting firm from a donor with documented ties to Chinese intelligence. June 2019, you killed Taiwan defense legislation in committee, preventing weapons sales that would help Taiwan defend itself. June 15th, $40,000 in speaking fees from a Chinese-American organization that the FBI has identified as a CCP front group. Those are coincidences, Schiff protested weakly, his voice barely audible. Coincidences. Kennedy laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Son, if these are coincidences, then I'm the Emperor of China. The only thing coincidental here is how every single pro-China vote you make coincidentally makes you richer. That's not coincidence, that's corruption with a paper trail bright enough to read by at midnight. He pulled out classified intelligence assessments that had been recently declassified. According to FBI counterintelligence, Chinese state media has mentioned you favorably 847 times in the last 5 years. 847 times. They love you in Beijing, Congressman. You know how many times they've mentioned me favorably? 0. Wonder why that is. Kennedy then delivered another bombshell, pulling out briefing logs that should have remained classified but had been declassified specifically for this hearing. January 2018, the FBI briefs you on Chinese influence operations targeting Congress, specifically warns you that you're a target. February 2018, what do? You vote against every single China-related security measure that comes before your committee. March 2018, you publicly call concerns about Chinese influence xenophobic and racist. That's not oversight, Congressman. That's overlook. That's see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, because evil is paying you. He produced testimony from a Chinese defector, a former intelligence officer who'd fled to the United States. This gentleman, who's currently in witness protection, says that you were considered, and I quote, a reliable asset for shaping American policy in China's favor. Not formally recruited, but useful nonetheless. Very useful. Even Chinese intelligence considers you their boy, Kennedy observed. That's quite an achievement for someone who swore an oath to defend America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You've managed to become friendly with the foreign ones. That's outrageous, Schiff started to protest. You know what's outrageous? Kennedy interrupted, his voice rising. Selling out American workers to China. Selling out American technology to Chinese theft. Selling out American security to Chinese interests. All while getting personally rich from Chinese-connected money. That's what's outrageous, sir. He pulled out investment records that showed Schiff's personal portfolio. After classified briefings on Chinese military threats, your investment portfolio shows purchases of Chinese stocks. You literally bet against America and for China. You received classified intelligence about threats to American national security, and your response was to invest in the country threatening us. That's not just wrong, Congressman. That's not just corrupt. That's borderline treasonous. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several people gasped. Even Democrats on the committee looked shocked. Now, I'm not saying you're a Chinese agent, Kennedy clarified carefully. I'm saying you vote like one, profit like one, and defend Beijing like one. If it walks like a Peking duck, quacks like a Peking duck, and takes money from Peking, well, it's probably compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. He closed the China folder with finality. American factories closed because of China. American jobs lost to Chinese competition. American technology stolen by Chinese espionage. And through it all, while American workers suffered, Adam Schiff got richer. You sold out the working families of this country for Chinese cash. You're supposed to represent California, not Beijing. Though I guess it's hard to tell the difference when you're cashing checks from both. Kennedy reached for yet another folder, this one labeled media manipulation, and his expression suggested he was saving the best for last. Speaking of selling out, let's talk about how you've corrupted the free press. Because a congressman who lies is bad enough, but a congressman who turns journalists into his personal propaganda army, that's a whole different level of swamp creature. My Uncle Budrow had an old boat, Kennedy began, settling into what was clearly going to be another devastating revelation. That boat leaked something terrible. No matter how much we patched it, water kept coming in. That boat held water better than your office holds classified information. He opened the media folder and pulled out a stack of documents that had to be 6 inches thick, by my count, and I had 3 separate forensic analysts verify this because I like to be thorough. Your office was the source of 438 unauthorized leaks of classified information to the media over a 5-year period. 438 leaks. That's more leaks than my Uncle Buddy's fishing boat, and that thing sank in Lake Pontchartrain. But these weren't random leaks. These were specifically timed, carefully orchestrated, designed for maximum political damage and minimum regard for national security or truth. Kennedy began methodically laying out evidence that painted a picture of systematic media manipulation. Leaked timelines matched to market movements. Classified information shared with favored reporters. Embargoed stories coordinated for maximum impact. Talking points distributed to friendly journalists. It was a machine, a well-oiled propaganda operation run out of a congressional office. But here's where it gets interesting, Kennedy said, his phone suddenly buzzing. Oh, look at this. Text message just came in. He held up his phone to the cameras. What's my opinion supposed to be on this Kennedy thing, Adam? Need talking points ASAP. Looks like it's from a CNN anchor. The room erupted. Schiff grabbed for his own phone, frantically typing, his panic obvious to everyone watching. Oh, are you trying to warn them? Kennedy asked with exaggerated innocence. Too late, I'm afraid. See, that wasn't really from CNN. That was from my staff using a spoofed number to test whether you'd react like someone who regularly coordinates with media. And you did. Thank you for confirming what we already knew. Schiff's face had gone purple with rage and humiliation. Been played, trapped, exposed as easily as a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But we have real evidence too, Kennedy continued, producing actual recordings. Like this hot mic moment from your appearance on MSNBC last month. He played audio that had clearly been captured when Schiff thought he was off air. Schiff's voice, unmistakable. Make sure Jake gets the 3 talking points before his show tonight. Tapper needs to hit them hard, especially the stuff about Kennedy being a Trump puppet. Can you get someone at CNN to run the story about his donors? So you're not just leaking to the media, Kennedy observed. You're directing them. You're telling them what to report, how to report it, when to report it. You've turned journalists into stenographers, and frankly, that's an insult to stenographers because at least they accurately record what's actually said. Financial records revealed an even darker truth. Kennedy displayed payment records showing speaking fees, consulting contracts, and book deals that created financial relationships between Schiff and major media companies. Speaking fees from media corporations, $1.2 million over 5 years. Paid contributor contracts, another $800,000. Book deals with publishers owned by media conglomerates, $3 million. He shook his head. You've turned intelligence work into a profit center. You leak classified information, go on TV to discuss the leaks, get paid for appearances, write books about the leaks, and make millions. P.T. Barnum would be impressed, except he was at least honest about being in the circus business. The evidence of manufactured news was even more damning. Kennedy produced side-by-side comparisons of original documents versus what Schiff had presented to media. Original email says meeting, you changed it to secret meeting. Original says discussion, you changed it to conspiracy. Original says phone call, you changed it to shakedown. You edit evidence like a Hollywood script doctor, except movies are labeled fiction and you present your fiction as fact. Kennedy pulled out a massive binder, easily 300 pages thick, 127 instances of doctored evidence, 89 cases of selectively edited transcripts presented to media, 234 deliberately misleading characterizations. You don't spin the truth, Congressman. You put it in a blender, hit puree, and serve it to a media that's either too lazy or too compromised to fact-check you. He looked directly at the press gallery, making eye contact with as many journalists as possible. And you folks in the media, some of you are victims of this con man, but some of you are willing accomplices. Either way, you've been played. Congressman Schiff views truth as optional and facts as flexible, and you've helped him spread lies to the American people for years. Kennedy then produced perhaps his most effective prop yet, a simple dictionary, the kind you'd find in any school. I brought this to help Congressman Schiff, he said, flipping it open. There's a word in here, journalism. Definition: the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. Nowhere does it say taking dictation from Adam Schiff. Nowhere does it mention repeating lies without fact-checking. Nowhere does it suggest that journalism means being a propaganda arm for corrupt politicians. The press section had gone noticeably quieter, many journalists looking distinctly uncomfortable as their role in Schiff's deception was laid bare. But here's the real kicker, Kennedy continued, producing financial records that showed suspicious trading patterns. We tracked the timeline of your leaks against stock market movements, particularly stocks that would be affected by the intelligence you were leaking. Every time you leaked market-sensitive classified information, certain people made millions in trades. Want to guess who those people were connected to? He didn't wait for an answer. Your donors, your associates, your financial network. You didn't just leak for political gain, Congressman. You leaked for profit. That's insider trading with classified information. That's not just unethical, that's spectacularly criminal. Kennedy pulled out one final piece of evidence from the media folder, a devastating compilation video showing Schiff making completely contradictory statements to different media outlets, sometimes on the same day. To CNN, he'd say one thing. To MSNBC, something completely different. To Fox News, on the rare occasions he appeared, something else entirely. The video was damning, showing Schiff contradicting himself dozens of times, his stories changing based on his audience. You know what we call someone who tells different stories to different people back in Louisiana? Kennedy asked. We call them a liar. But I guess in California, in the corridors of power, in the green rooms of cable news, you call it media strategy or message discipline or some other fancy term that means lying. He closed the media folder with obvious disgust. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of the press because our democracy needs truth. The founders understood that an informed citizenry was essential to self-governance. But you've turned the press into your personal propaganda machine. You've corrupted journalism itself. That's not just a betrayal of Congress or your constituents. That's a betrayal of democracy itself. Kennedy took off his glasses and cleaned them with his handkerchief, a gesture that had become his signature during this hearing, a moment of theatrical pause before delivering another blow. Thomas Jefferson said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." But Jefferson assumed newspapers would tell the truth. He assumed journalists would investigate, not stenograph. He assumed the press would hold power accountable, not serve as its mouthpiece. He reached for the next folder, this one ominously thick and labeled impeachment abuse. Speaking of abusing power and corrupting institutions, let's talk about your impeachment circus. Because if manipulating the media was bad, if taking Chinese money was worse, what you did to the Constitution and to due process was unforgivable. It's the difference between pickpocketing and armed robbery. Both are crimes, but one is so much worse. The folder opened to reveal what looked like architectural plans. Kennedy pulled out a detailed floor plan of the Capitol building and spread it across the desk. You know, when I was a boy in Louisiana, we'd sometimes play hide and seek in my grandpappy's barn. But even as children, we understood you couldn't just make up new rules in the middle of the game because you were losing. Apparently, that's a lesson they skip at Harvard Law School. He pointed to specific rooms in the Capitol basement with a laser pointer. This here is the SCIF, the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It's designed for classified briefings, for protecting national security information. It's not designed for kangaroo courts, but that's exactly what you turned it into. Like a Batman villain running a secret lair, except Batman villains usually have better plans and more respect for due process. Behind these closed doors, Kennedy continued, his voice hardening, you held secret impeachment hearings. Republicans were physically locked out. Members of Congress, duly elected representatives of the American people, were barred from participating in hearings about removing a president. Witnesses were coached in private, their testimony shaped before it ever became public. Selective leaks went a friendly media to create a narrative. Due process didn't just die in that basement, Congressman. It was murdered with premeditation. A Republican congressman from Ohio who'd been one of those locked out couldn't contain himself. That's exactly what happened. I represent 600,000 Americans, and I was denied access to hearings about impeaching the president they voted for. Order, the committee chairman said, but even he sounded half-hearted. The truth was pouring out now, unstoppable. Kennedy produced witness testimony, not from the impeachment hearings, but from people who'd been present during the coaching sessions. I've got something special here, he announced, pressing play on a video. A middle-aged man appeared on screen, looking nervous but determined. My name is William Taylor, former ambassador to Ukraine. I testified in Congressman Schiff's impeachment hearings. I need to clear my conscience about what happened. The man took a breath, then continued. Congressman Schiff's staff coached me extensively before my testimony. They told me what to say, how to phrase things, what words to use and avoid. When I expressed concerns about accurately representing what happened, they told me that accuracy was less important than narrative. They said if I didn't follow their script, my career would be destroyed. They showed me examples of what they'd done to other State Department officials who hadn't cooperated. I was terrified, so I said what they wanted me to say, but I can't live with that lie anymore. The hearing room exploded into chaos. Even Democrats looked shocked. This was a bombshell that changed everything. That video has been doctored. Schiff protested desperately. Has it? Kennedy asked mildly. Well, good news. Ambassador Taylor is outside right now, willing to testify under oath in public, unlike your basement star chamber sessions. Should we bring him in? Or would you like to reconsider your statement about the video being fake? Schiff slumped in his chair, defeated. Kennedy then pulled out a small leather-bound book and held it up reverently. Pop quiz, Congressman Schiff. This is the Constitution of the United States. Article 2, Section 4. What does it say about impeachment? And please don't Google it, though I know that's your instinct. Schiff glared but began to recite from memory, his voice dull. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for, and conviction of, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Stop right there, Kennedy interrupted. Treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. Now show me where in the Constitution it says because Adam Schiff doesn't like him, or for hurting Adam Schiff's feelings, or for winning an election Adam Schiff wanted Hillary Clinton to win. Laughter rippled through the gallery despite the tension. You see, Kennedy continued, you didn't just break procedural rules. You violated every precedent in American impeachment history. Let me list them for you, because I know you have trouble keeping track of constitutional requirements. He began ticking off violations on his fingers. Precedent, the accused gets to confront witnesses against him. You violated it. Precedent. The minority party gets equal subpoena power. You violated it. Precedent. Hearings are open except for legitimately classified portions. You violated it. Precedent. The accused has due process rights. You violated it. Precedent. There's a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. You definitely violated that one. Kennedy produced comparison charts showing every previous impeachment process in American history versus Schiff's version. The contrast was staggering. Andrew Johnson's impeachment in 1868 had more due process than yours. Richard Nixon's near impeachment in 1974 was more fair than yours. Bill Clinton's impeachment in 1998 looks like a model of procedural justice compared to your kangaroo court. You know you've gone too far when even Bill Clinton's impeachment looks fair in comparison. He pulled out transcripts from the basement hearings, documents that had been classified, but were now being declassified specifically for this hearing. Reading from them, Kennedy revealed a pattern of witness coaching, evidence manipulation, and procedural abuse that was shocking even to those who'd suspected Schiff of wrongdoing. But here's what really burns me up, Kennedy said, his anger finally breaking through completely. Real crimes went uninvestigated while you chased your impeachment fantasy. Real corruption went unpunished while you conducted show trials. Real threats to America went unaddressed while you played partisan games in your basement. You had the power and resources of the House Intelligence Committee, and you used them to settle political scores instead of protecting Americans. A voice from the gallery called out, "What about the Constitution? What about defending it like you swore to do?" "Exactly," Kennedy agreed, pointing at the speaker. "Exactly the right question. What about the Constitution, Congressman Schiff? You swore an oath to support and defend it. Instead, you used it as toilet paper in your basement bathroom court." He turned back to face Schiff directly. "You know what the worst part is? Real crimes went uninvestigated. Real abuses of power went unpunished. Real threats to national security went ignored. All because you were obsessed with overturning an election you didn't like. You betrayed your oath, your office, and your country." Kennedy pulled out a letter, yellowed with age, a photocopy of an original document. "This is from Alexander Hamilton, Federalist Paper number 65, written in 1788. He warned about exactly what you did. He said, and I quote, 'There will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt.'" He looked up at Schiff. "Hamilton saw you coming 230 years ago, Congressman. He warned America about politicians like you who would abuse impeachment for partisan purposes. The founders gave us impeachment as a tool to remove genuinely criminal presidents. You turned it into a weapon to attack political opponents. You validated every fear the founders had about how impeachment might be abused." Kennedy closed the impeachment folder with a sound like a judge's gavel. "You turned a constitutional safeguard into a political weapon. You turned due process into don't process. You turned the people's house into your personal playhouse. You made a mockery of everything impeachment was supposed to be." He stood up, something he'd barely done during the entire hearing, and addressed not just Schiff but the cameras, the press, the American people watching. What Congressman Schiff did wasn't impeachment. It was a coup attempt dressed in constitutional clothing. It was a partisan hit job masquerading as principled oversight. It was everything the founders feared and tried to prevent when they reluctantly gave Congress the power to remove presidents. Kennedy sat back down and looked at Schiff, who had shrunk into his chair like a child being scolded. The powerful congressman who'd entered this hearing with an entourage and supreme confidence now looked small and defeated. "But the good news," Kennedy said, his voice softening slightly, "is that truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Like cream rising in milk, it comes to the top. And today, Congressman, the truth about your impeachment sham is finally seeing daylight." He reached for the final folder, the thickest one yet. One more to go. The grand finale, the piece de resistance. Or as we say in Louisiana, the last dance before the lights come on and everyone sees what you really look like. The hearing room had undergone a complete transformation. What had begun hours earlier as a packed arena of confident Democrats and smug journalists had become something closer to a courtroom where a guilty verdict was being slowly, methodically, inexorably delivered. Adam Schiff sat slumped at the witness table, his expensive Armani suit wrinkled and stained with sweat, his perfect tan looking sickly under the harsh lights. His hands trembled visibly. Of his original entourage of 5 lawyers, Only one remained, and that lawyer looked like he was calculating how quickly he could escape without it looking like abandonment. The others had quietly excused themselves during breaks, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere, anything to avoid being associated with what was clearly a career-ending disaster. Senator John Kennedy opened the final folder with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing to make the last fatal cut. "You know, Congressman Schiff," he began, his Louisiana drawl somehow making the words hurt more, "we've covered quite a bit of ground here today. Russia lies, whistleblower coaching, Buck's dead bodies, Chinese money, media corruption, impeachment abuse. That's quite a career you've built. It's like a house of cards, impressive to look at until someone breathes on it, and then it all comes tumbling down." He pulled out a financial document that made Schiff's remaining lawyer grab his client's arm in alarm. "This here is your personal financial disclosure from 2015, when you first became ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. Net worth, approximately $500,000. Not bad for a public servant. Respectable. Then here's your 2023 disclosure. Net worth, approximately $4.5 million. That's an 800% increase." Kennedy let that sink in. Either you're the world's greatest investor, or public service pays a whole lot better than the rest of us thought. He laid out year-by-year financial records, creating a timeline that showed Schiff's wealth growing in direct proportion to his scandals. Every Russia investigation appearance, your net worth grew. Every impeachment hearing, your assets increased. Every leak to media, your investments performed remarkably well. You found a way to monetize corruption. You turned lies into luxury. You made betrayal profitable. It's almost impressive in a deeply disturbing way. Just then, something happened that shocked everyone in the room. Schiff's remaining lawyer stood up abruptly, his face pale. "Mr. Chairman, I need to state for the record that I can no longer in good conscience represent Mr. Schiff in this matter. My ethical obligations as an attorney prevent me from continuing this representation knowing what I now know." The lawyer gathered his papers, refused to look at Schiff, and walked out of the hearing room. On live television, broadcast to millions, Adam Schiff's own attorney had abandoned him. The symbolism was devastating. "Well," Kennedy observed mildly, "when the rats start leaving the ship, you know it's sinking fast. Though I apologize to rats everywhere for the comparison, because rats at least show loyalty to their own kind." Schiff was completely alone now. No lawyers, no staff, no allies, just him and the mountain of evidence of his crimes. "This is a setup," Schiff suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is Trump's revenge. This is a political hit job. This is consequences," Kennedy corrected calmly. "Something you've managed to avoid your entire career through connections, corruption, and media manipulation. But like my grandpappy used to say, the chickens always come home to roost. And Congressman, your entire farm just showed up." Then something unexpected happened. A Democratic congresswoman from California, someone who'd served with Schiff for years, stood up, her voice shaking. "I can't sit here silently anymore. I'm from California. I've watched Adam Schiff operate for years. I've made excuses for him. I've looked the other way. But Senator Kennedy is right about everything. We've enabled this corruption through our silence and our cowardice. I can't be complicit anymore." The defection from his own party on live television seemed to break something fundamental in Schiff. His hands began shaking so badly he knocked over his water glass, sending water cascading across the table and onto his lap. He didn't even try to clean it up, just sat there in his expensive suit, soaking wet, defeated. "But we're not quite done yet," Kennedy continued, pulling out a final set of documents from the folder. "These are criminal referrals I'll be submitting to the Department of Justice the moment this hearing concludes. Let me read the charges so everyone understands what we're talking about." He put on his reading glasses with theatrical precision. "Perjury, 17 counts. Every time you lied to Congress under oath. Leaking classified information, 23 counts. Each one carefully documented. Obstruction of justice, 11 counts. Hiding evidence, tampering with witnesses. RICO violations, 7 counts. You literally ran a criminal enterprise out of your congressional office. Wire fraud, 9 counts. Those Chinese wire transfers we discussed. Campaign finance violations, 31 counts. Buck was just the tip of that iceberg. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violation, 6 counts. Taking money from foreign nationals through cutouts. Conspiracy, 14 counts. All those people you coordinated with. That's 98 federal charges, Congressman. In Louisiana, we'd say you're in more trouble than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Kennedy stood up, gathering all his folders, stacking them neatly. You know what the saddest part of all this is? You had every advantage: Harvard education, law degree, elected to Congress. You could have served honorably. You could have been a statesman. Instead, you chose lies over truth, power over principle, profit over people. You chose to be corrupt. He looked directly at Schiff with an expression that mixed pity and contempt. My mama taught me to always try to end on something positive, so here's mine. You've provided America with a perfect textbook example of how not to serve in public office. Future generations will study your career as a cautionary tale. Political science classes will analyze your corruption. Ethics courses will use you as the ultimate example of what not to do. You'll be remembered, Congressman, just not the way you hoped. Then Kennedy delivered his final blow with devastating Southern politeness. Bless your heart, Adam Schiff. And when you're sitting in federal prison, which you will be because the evidence is overwhelming and the charges are coming, maybe you'll have time to read that thesis you wrote at Harvard about prosecutorial ethics. Consider it remedial education. Maybe you'll finally learn the lessons you should have learned 30 years ago. The room was absolutely silent except for the sound of Schiff's labored breathing. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his freedom about to be taken away, his legacy reduced to a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition and corruption. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said formally, I move that this committee recommend immediate criminal investigation of Congressman Adam Schiff by the Department of Justice, immediate revocation of all his security clearances, an immediate ethics investigation into his conduct with a recommendation for expulsion from the House of Representatives. All in favor. Every Republican hand shot up immediately. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, Democratic hands began rising too. First one, then three, then five, then seven. Even members of Schiff's own party couldn't defend the indefensible anymore. The evidence was too overwhelming, the corruption too obvious, the betrayal too complete. Motion carries, the chairman announced, his voice heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. It was over. Schiff tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. He had to be helped from his chair by a Capitol police officer. The man who'd entered the hearing room with supreme confidence, surrounded by an entourage ready to destroy a Southern senator, was now being physically assisted out of the room, broken and alone. Wait, Kennedy called out as Schiff was being led away. One more thing, Congressman. The man paused, looking back with dead eyes. That accent you mocked at the beginning of this hearing, Kennedy said, his drawl now pronounced and proud. That backward Southern way of talking you said was embarrassing. It just ended your career. Turns out slow and steady really does win the race. Especially when the rabbit is a lying, corrupt fraud who underestimated the turtle. He packed up his battered briefcase, the same one he'd arrived with hours earlier, and prepared to leave. But before he did, he turned to face the cameras one final time, speaking not to the committee but to America. To the American people watching at home, this is what real accountability looks like. This is what happens when truth confronts lies. This is what justice means. Not partisan games, not political theater, not cable news shouting matches. Real consequences for real corruption. He smiled, his Louisiana charm returning now that the unpleasant work was done. And to my constituents back home in Louisiana, thank you for sending this simple country lawyer to Washington. Turns out sometimes it takes someone from outside the swamp to clean up the swamp. Sometimes it takes someone they underestimate to catch them off guard. Today was a good day for truth. Today was a good day for America. As Kennedy walked out of the hearing room, the gallery erupted into applause. Not partisan cheering, not political celebration, but genuine appreciation from Americans who just watched corruption finally face real consequences. The cameras captured one last image before cutting away. Adam Schiff being helped into a waiting car, his career over, his crimes exposed, his empire collapsed, destroyed utterly by a man he'd called an ignorant Southern puppet. If you believe in accountability regardless of party, if you think corrupt politicians should face consequences, Smash that like button. Subscribe to this channel to see more stories of justice being served. Share this with everyone who needs to understand that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win and the corrupt face justice. Because this isn't just about Adam Schiff. This is about every politician who thinks they're above the law. This is about every public servant who's forgotten that service means sacrifice, not self-enrichment. This is about every representative who confuses their office with a personal ATM machine. The message from today is clear. Your time is coming. People like Senator Kennedy are watching, investigating, preparing. And when they're ready, they'll do what Kennedy did to Schiff. They'll present the evidence. They'll speak the truth. They'll let justice run its course. The age of unaccountable corruption is ending. Welcome to the new era where lies have consequences and corruption gets punished. Welcome to accountability. Welcome to justice.